All right, well, good morning. It's time to get started with our next talk, 25 Alfresco things that you might not know but should. And I can't think of a better person to give this talk than Nick Burch, who's, you'll see him in the forums and on Stack Exchange and all over the place, helping people out and giving good answers. So I'm anxious to see, to learn 25 new things today. So thank you. Give it up for Nick.
So, for those of you who don't know me, you might be wondering why I am in a position to pick 25 things that some of you may not know. I've been involved in the Apache Software Foundation for over a decade, work on projects such as chemistry, which powers CMIS. I used to work for Alfresco as an engineer, CTO at a company called Quanticate. While there, I do still code, and I do a lot of mentoring and teaching of new team members, and I'm fairly active on StackOverflow. So, where did my list of 25 things come from? I have to admit, some of them are mistakes that I have made in the recent and distant past. They're things that new members of my team have struggled with that I've had to help them with, coach them on. They're neat tricks that I picked up by looking at open source extensions, open source add-ins, where I'm looking at, how the hell did they do that? I'm like, oh, that's interesting. A lot of it is also just coming from new Alfresco developers on StackOverflow. So I spent some time in the last 2 weeks going through the StackOverflow questions tagged with Alfresco, looking at the kinds of problems that new developers are hitting, kind of mistakes they're making, misunderstandings. Look through the forums as well to try and get an idea about what it is that for some of us who've been around for a long time is really obvious, but for newer developers it's just kind of baffling or weird, or they just couldn't find it. I see we've got Helen in the audience, so she will hopefully take some of these and put them more obviously in the docs. So, source code. I think that's fairly obvious, but it surprises a lot of people. You can go on the Alfresco GitHub. At the moment, you probably want to start with Community Edition Old. From the sound of it, in a month or two, you'll be able to look through all the modules individually. If you're an enterprise customer for now, that's the URL you can go to. You need to talk to your account rep, because they'll give you a username and password that you can access it. Sam, you're still deciding what to do in the Git world about that. And then if you go on GitHub, you can find a lot of the add-ins. You can see their source as well. Get the Addons Alfresco site. If you're struggling to do something that can be done in Alfresco, the best way to learn, since it's open source, is to find what bit of Alfresco is powering the thing you want to rip off, learn from, whatever, and then go and find the source code behind it and look at it. Yes, there are some quite good developer documentation on quite a lot of things, but in many cases the best example you will find is actually in Alfresco or the Alfresco extensions. So if you can't really find what you need in a tutorial or whatever, just find the class name or the JavaScript class or object and things like that. Go and search for the source. Quite often just putting that class name to Google, you might get a few hits of people talking about it, but usually within the first page or two you'll find a hit to the Alfresco source. You can go and look at it, read it, understand it. If it's full of to-dos, then maybe there's some dragons around, but usually you'll see what's going on. You can look at the learn unit tests, and from that you can learn one way of using it at least. So don't be afraid to go and look at the source. JavaScript console. You may even have the main author of this hiding at the back of the room. Who's used the JavaScript console? Almost everyone, excellent. It's probably the add-on I use the most day to day. And the thing I use it for is admin and investigation without having to restart my server, without having to write some Java code that's then a pain because I can't deploy it until the evening. You get full access to all the repo group objects, you get a nice friendly interface with highlighting and tab complete. And a lot of the admin stuff that you want to do can be done. Sometimes it is a bit of a struggle because there aren't the right services exposed in JavaScript, but for a lot of stuff you can run it. And then I save all the scripts I use often in the repo, because you can load them up, and that means that when I'm on holiday, other people in my team can then go in, call up that same script, run the report, see who the users are, see what's changed, and then find them out and pass the info on. So it looks like this. At the front, be able to see if you haven't seen before, but you've got nice colour highlighting. It's fairly easy to see. You can load the code, run it, get a little output there. So this is something that we run once a month, set up in a complicated named folder that we can run as a rule, but it's not too bad to do. Fairly easy for your admin stuff. I was going to give a shout out to Robin, but he's had to nip off back to London. The Alfresco Coens. There was a talk on it last year. Anyone see that talk last year? Only a few of you. Okay. So the idea is it's a series of self-learning tasks for new Alfresco developers. It takes you through a lot of the basic stuff that you're going to need to do, and it's available in code. You can try it, you can fill in the gaps, you can compile it, you can run it, you can learn from it, you can play around with it. So if you've got new developers joining your team, or you're a new developer, and you're looking for ways to learn that don't just involve opening up an Alfresco book and copying and pasting or retyping the code, and you want something where you can start with a runnable example and then fill in the blanks, it's a really good way for new developers to get started to learn. And it is on GitHub, so if when you're guiding your new team members through it, you find that there's a gap, well, you can just go and add an extra little story, contribute it in with a pull request, and help everyone else. So if you've got new developers starting, please try it. If you're a new developer, you might want to run through and see if there's any gaps, and otherwise please contribute some more ideas into there so we can help bring people up to speed. I know we've had a lot of talk about ADF, but I'm guessing there's at least some people in the room who are using iCal or trying to use iCal. These are the 4 best resources I know of for learning about iCal, finding out what's going on. If you're new, this book, which was written by, I think, a couple of the Order of Bees, Developing Share Extensions with iCal from the Ground Up. It's available on Google Docs, so you can read through it. It's really good taking you through all the basics of setting up iCal widgets, learning from them, going on. The tutorial covers probably about half the stuff I'd like it to. I keep finding gaps with new developers where you move from, say, tutorial 3 to tutorial 4, and there's too much of a jump for them. But it's pretty good for getting your head around how all of that works. And then if you go on the Alfresco blogs, search on the tag iCal, there's a huge, huge amount of resources available for you to learn iCal. Node locator. Something that you'll find yourself needing to do fairly often is finding a node based on some information that isn't just the node ref. And that can be a bit fiddly until you discover this service and matching REST API. It's really easy. There's a whole bunch of these different locators. There's an XPath one so that you can say, here's the XPath, find me the node. Or you can say, here is, just give me the company home. Or for a node that I know is in the site, please find me the site. You can use the web script here. This is not the new shiny REST API way, this is the older web script way. You can just pass in a node locator and some parameters. So you can say XPath node locator parameter, and then pass in the XPath, you back the node ref. Or you can pop in a node ref into the middle there and say like the site home, and it'll give you the site home. Available in Java as well. So if you're finding yourself needing to get from paths to nodes or from one node to a parent or that sort of thing, and especially if you're trying to do it remotely, then the node locator REST APIs is really worth knowing about because it can be pretty quick compared to some of the other ways. Quite powerful and seems pretty buried. So here's one example. We do an XPath one with query for app company home. We get back a nice little bit of JSON here with the node ref in, and then we can work onwards from that. Node cleaning. Also known as, why is my database so big? If you're on 5.2, this is less of an issue. If you're on 4 and the earlier 5, it can really bite you. You've got your repo set up, you're running away, you're starting to load some data in, it's all good, and then suddenly you're doing a database backup, and your database backup seems to be too big, which is odd because you haven't actually got that many nodes. And then you start digging into it and say, well, where's the space gone? And you find that alf prop link and alf audit entry are sort of a few million rows each, hogging a gigabyte or so. This normally happens when you've turned on auditing and you're not purging. So have a think about deleting some of your older audit entries if you don't need them anymore. You can do that. There's a REST API you can call that works confusingly on Unix time, so you'll probably have to turn your nice date strings into that and then call that. And if your alf prop link is huge, it's because you need to turn on the prop cleaner schedule task. If your database has got huge and you turn this on for the first time, your repository will slow to a crawl for a couple of hours while it gets rid of all of those orphan node entries, but after that you can run it on a Sunday morning and it will complete in a couple of minutes. If you're on 5.2, that's on by default, so it shouldn't bite you. But I've seen a few people who've set up new repos, turn it on and run it for a bit, the database has got huge, the backups are really slow, and they can't work out where it's gone. It's almost always the audit entries and the prop link. Other thing is, why is my Alfresco disk run out of space? Users have deleted stuff, you haven't actually got that much content, but somehow all the space is used. When people delete things, they get moved into the trash can. When they get emptied out the trash can, by default, Alfresco copies them from the content store into content store.deleted and leaves them there. You may need to be emptying out the trash can, especially if you're not popping temporary aspect on things. If you're looking at the trash can, you can see where the nodes came from. If you're trying to do it in Java, then this is the node property you'll need to see where it came from. But once it's been deleted from the trash can, or it was never in the trash can, it will sit in the content store.deleted until you by default go in and back it up if you're going to want a record of it, or just empty it out. If you have a look at the content clean docs there, that explains a lot more about how it works, how you can tweak these things, how you control how long these things last for. But just be aware that out of the box, Alfresco is paranoid about not deleting your stuff, and if you're not careful, your disk will fill up with things that you thought you got rid of. Look, Jeff in. Python and CMISlib, when I'm not doing admin tasks with the JavaScript console, I'm writing 10-line Python files using CMISlib to do stuff. So if you're trying to do pure Alfresco admin, I'd suggest you use rules or use JavaScript console. If you're doing massive full-blown integrations, you probably want to be using public REST APIs or CMIS or something like that. But when you need to script up something for a one-off or maybe run a few times with a quick bit of logic that's going to be connecting to your Alfresco repo, maybe fetching some things, changing some things, deleting some things, the easiest way I know of is to use Python and the CMISlib, to use CMIS operations to do all your basic CRUD stuff. There's a script that we run every couple of months that just syncs some content from Alfresco off to a special read-only area of our shared drive so that people can see that for reference. And then another one that just checks that two folders, things are the same checksums on them. You can also use Groovy and OpenCMIS, or Scala and OpenCMIS. I tend to find that because the OpenCMIS APIs are written in Java, they tend to be a bit more verbose, and it doesn't feel as Groovy-ish or as Scala-ish, whereas the Python ones are very Pythonic, and so you can write some very short, concise codes that will do quite a lot of stuff for admin or little quick integrations and one-offs and so on. Custom node refs. Who's looked in their data dictionary and seen all of these boring-looking random node refs, and then suddenly you see workspace, basis store, rendering action space, and thought, I want one of them too. The annoying thing is that you can't get one of those through the node service. The only way you can get one of those well-known special node refs is with an ACP. Everyone know what ACPs are? A few of you, or maybe I should put an extra entry in for those. Alfresco content packages, it's basically a little XML file that describes the content and optionally refers to a binary blob that's also stored in the zip file. When you bootstrap one of them in or import them manually, you can choose to either have new node refs created for things or to inherit the node ref. If you go and look in the source code for Alfresco under repository config, not models, but import or something like that, you'll see a whole bunch of these XML files with things like publishing root space set as the UUID. And that's how those nice well-known node refs got into your repo to start with. So if you are wanting these kind of well-known node refs or vanity node refs, you're going to need to do it through an ACP. Go and grab the source tree, have a look, see how the well-known ones that you've already got were done, and do the same thing. When things don't work, you can attach a debugger from your IDE to the Tomcats, but only if you start your Tomcat with a special JPDA flag, which exposes a remote debugging interface. That can work quite well for stepping through your own code, but be aware that you're going to have to stop your repo, start it again in a special mode, make sure that the firewalling rules are set up so that your developing machine can talk to that port on the production server. And then remember to turn it all off again when you're done. I use that quite a lot on things where it works in a unit test and fails in production. There's a Rhino JavaScript debugger that will let you step through all the server-side JavaScript, which is really good if you've got web scripts that are JavaScript based or you've got rules that are JavaScript based. But it's always really fiddly and hard to do on production because it tries to start a graphical prompt on the server, and if it's running as a Windows service, that won't work. If it's running on a Linux box and it's running with the wrong account, then that won't work. So it's a nice idea, and I use it a lot on my local machine when I'm trying to step through some of the scripts, but I find it doesn't really work in production. Log4j, you can just add all these log statements into your code and see what's going on. You can add them in at a debug level and then turn that off in production. It works for Java, it works for JavaScript, it works with your activity. You can have it for your activity Java delegates, for your activity script tasks, for your web scripts, for everything like that. It's worth looking into if you don't know about it. And the file you're probably going to want to create is dev.log4j.properties. Just drop that one in on that path, and then you can override all of the logging levels so that in testing you can say, okay, for all of my code I want to see debug, and on production I want to see warning or something like that. The other thing, if you're doing stuff in Share, there's Surf debug tools and iCal debug tools. Just have a quick Google and you find out about those. And make sure that you're using the unminimized JavaScript resources if you're trying to debug them. If you've got the minimized ones, it's a real pain to see what's going on. So just have a quick look, see how you turn that on if you don't know already, and then it's much easier to step through in the browser developer tools to see what's going on with your browser-side JavaScript. If you're working with content types, kinds of content that Alfresco doesn't know as standard, you'll need to tell it what those extra MIME types are, what those file extensions are. We've got a reference here to a couple of the remote APIs that you might want to call to see what Alfresco knows about, and then when you've added your extra MIME types in, to check that it really has seen them and picked them up. Alfresco ships a nice little sample file here that you can use if you want to add new ones. It's pretty well documented. That's what you're going to want to complete, and then you can use these two to check that your new MIME type has been picked up. For transformers, if you head to that URL there, you get a list of all the MIME types in your system, and then you can click through and see the details for each MIME type of what extractors it's got, what transformations are currently registered. It only shows the currently active one if you've got one that's a different priority. But if you're trying to work out why your PDF couldn't be turned into a text file or your video didn't turn into the other video, that's the first place to look to find out what transformers you've got and what's going on with them. If you want to have previewers or transformers for new file formats, first thing you should do is have a look at Share Extras and otherwise the rest of Alfresco add-ons. Because most of the stuff you want, someone else has already done and contributed, so you can grab them. Alfresco is relatively reluctant to accept many new transformers and previewers because there's often licensing issues on the libraries or licensing issues on the command line tools and all the support overhead. But there's a lot of people out there using those files, so have a look and see. If you can, try and do a pure JavaScript previewer. It's generally easier to configure and gives a better user experience. Otherwise, if you can find a command line tool that will do your transformation, then you'll want one of these runtime executable content transformer worker. Bit of a long mouthful, but just looking in the Alfresco samples, there's an example one for FFmpeg. Rip that one off or whatever you're trying to use. This one comes up quite a lot. Eventual consistency, also known as, but I've just added that node, where has it gone? There's a really good documentation page here that no one ever seems to read until they turn up on the forum or StackOverflow confused. Please read it. It explains all about how, with search services, things may take a while to turn up. If you need to add something and then see it in the same transaction, there are some of the services that will deliver that, or you can write your own. Generally, you want to look for canned query as a magic phrase to look up those services. When you're writing server-side JavaScript or FTL, there are an awful lot of special helper objects that get injected into the context to make your life easy, but they're not the same everywhere. So if you're running on the repository, you get a different set of helper objects to if you're running on share. If you're working in FreeMarket, you have a different set of objects to on the JavaScript side. If you have a look through these docs, they're pretty good at talking you through what all those objects are and what you can do with them. But it is possible to do a lot of stuff in JavaScript or in the FTL layer for looking up nodes, searching for nodes, navigating around node hierarchies, fetching people, all that sort of thing. But you need to know what these objects are because that's the main thing you've got to work with. You can add new ones into the JavaScript layer or the FTL layer. The only thing I'll say is that generally the standard Alfresco ones are working with friendly wrapped objects. So it'll take a node ref and turn that into a nice script node that has a lot of JavaScript-like methods on it. If you expose other Alfresco services that are working with Java objects, it can get quite fiddly. In Java, it's very easy to create a new QName. If you're in JavaScript, creating that raw Java QName object is really a bit of a faff. But you can have a read through the source, see how that's done, and then add your own in. Just mentioned there the bean that you need to extend from. It can be really handy to expose the whole Java service registry, but you probably don't want to do that because there's security implications, and also most of the raw Java services are expecting you to be in Java, able to create all sorts of arbitrary Java objects to pass in, which you can't do if you're in JavaScript. So probably don't want to do that in production without thinking it through first. If you're writing workflows and you need to do something special, some custom logic, two main ways of doing it. One of them is in Java, you create a bean based on that type, register it in Spring, and then in your workflow you just put that key on and say which bean's called. Or in JavaScript, in your workflow, you can pop one of those in and then just put in raw JavaScript that will run. The Java service, if you do it with Java delegate, you tend to get better errors. The downside is that if you change the JavaScript and redeploy, then all the new workflows run with that new JavaScript. Whereas if you change the Java delegate, then that same Java delegate will be called by the old workflows and the new workflows, and you have to start doing some careful control in there to make sure that's going to work. or you need to wait a few weeks for activity 6, which, as we heard on Wednesday, I think there's some nice stuff in there with the runtime process where you can modify it and say, I know the workflow used to talk about using this bit of script, but actually use that bit of script.
Is it possible to debug JavaScript if you without JavaScript?
Normally, we just put in a load of log4j debug statements and see what happened. I think in theory it should be able to, but generally we found it much easier just to put a bunch of log4j statements in and see what's happened. Because we can redeploy that one much quicker than we can get debugger to play nicely. Shared custom evaluators. Again, it's well documented if you understand the concept to go and look for. So if you want to control where extra actions turn up in a doclib, if you want to control where extra icons turn up on the left-hand side, it's fairly easy. I think there's about a dozen or so built in a standard, but there's a huge number of building blocks available. And it's very easy to configure new ones up. You say, okay, take the base MIME type one, configure in a MIME type of PDF, and then call that my PDF indicator one. Writing your own one in Java isn't too bad. We've done it a few times, but try and avoid hitting the repo or hitting any REST APIs. Try and use cache data that you've already got, like the JSON that's already been fetched. Because if you're making 2 remote calls per evaluator, and you've got a page with 50 nodes in, it goes really, really, really slowly. Whereas if you can cache it, then it'll be much better. These slides will be up later, but here's an example of doing one that's checking if it's a PDF or checking if someone is a site contributor. If you're doing stuff in Java, you should have a look at the run as blocks and the retrying transaction helpers. They'll let you run your Java code as a different user or wrapped up in a transaction where things will get retried if things fail. The first time you look at the pattern, it's a bit odd because you've got this code that's in a method inside a wrapper class, inside of something else, but it's just a way of having a runnable block that gets passed in. Take a look at the Alfresco source code itself. You'll see some good examples of how that one works. And pay attention to the talk we had yesterday, I think, about the issues with how exceptions should be treated if they're in one of these blocks. If you're running in share and you're trying to find out what the shared URL would be of a node, or you're trying to write an email template and you need to know for a given node where people should be directed to view it. If you're doing it by hand, in Java there's a bean called sysadmin params and a more helpful URL util that wraps it up. Otherwise, there's this REST API here that no one seems to know about. You pass it in a node ref and it'll give you back the URL. So we've passed in a node ref of a particular folder, and then we've got back the URL that's going to the right side to the document library to the path to it. So that's really handy if you're sending links to nodes off externally, in emails or tweets or whatever like that, and you want to take someone to the exact correct way and share for it. Rules and behaviors. It's the same idea, but coming at it from different angles. Behaviors are Java code bound to certain global events. Rules are a series of actions or steps that will take place that generally get configured in the UI. If you're doing stuff with behaviors, it's fairly easy to unit test it, whereas if you've got an admin going in, clicking lots of buttons and share, it can be quite hard to make sure that the right thing's going to happen. Though, as we saw from the hackathon talk yesterday, there is some nice stuff that's going on in the community to make it easy to manage these long sets of rules. This is what kind of rules look like and the kind of controls you've got. If you've got power users that are trying to do some customizations, we point them towards doing stuff with rules themselves, but maybe check back a month later and see what on earth they've done. This is an example here of a rule that can start a workflow when something goes into a folder. It's a common pattern that people seem to need to find. There's the example there for you to look up later. Common one, people post and say, I'm trying to check something in the database. Stop. Really, you don't want to go there. The only things that you should really be doing with the database, as a kind of developer or an admin is backing it up and restoring it. Don't go in and mess around with the low-level database tables. But do be aware that the database is just your metadata. If you back up the content store, delete your machine and restore the content store, you just have this jumbled grab bag of files with no idea what they are. If you only backed up the database and not the content store, you know what everything is, but you don't have it. Make sure you follow the instructions on maintaining the system and back both of them up and restore both of them. JMX, community, you can see some of the metrics. Enterprise, you can also change things, but change your passwords. Please do not go live with a password of change ASAP. This doc here tells you about how to get it configured at the Alfresco level, or you can just turn it on in Tomcat, and you get nice graphs like this, threads and memory. You get to see when your garbage collections happen, how often that's happening, and for enterprise, you can drill down into a lot of the beans, change the beans, run certain tasks. Naming and clashes, make sure you use your own package names. You almost never need to put stuff in the org Alfresco or org activity packaging, and if you do find yourself really having to do it, raise an enhancement request to tell people there's a terribly missing extension point. Pop stuff in Alfresco module or Alfresco extension. Don't just drop it into the middle of the Alfresco folders. And keep stuff in source control. Do not edit it live on your server. Otherwise, when you upgrade, you've just lost all your customizations. Node browser. Hopefully everyone know about Node browser? A few people? Okay. Depending on your version, you can get it through share or through the enterprise admin. Looks like this. You're not going to expose this to a user, but you can see all of your properties, exactly what type they are, where they came from, exactly what associations, exactly what permissions. If your users are reporting issues where they can't see something that they should be able to, they can't see the permissions, you need to have a look in here, see what's going on. Unit testing, do it with SDK3. Need some more examples. And finally, the benchmarking tools. You can load test your system. There's some really good benchmarking tools that no one seems to know about, no one seems to be making use of. But you can check performance parameters, say, right, well, if I bump up my memory, does that actually make it better? If I change the number of threads, does that make it better? And if you're trying to do the share PO unit testing with the Selenium automation, there's some really good examples in here of how to get all that working. And Jeff gave me the die symbol about 2 minutes ago, so I'll have to stop there. Thank you. The slides should be up online, I think, very soon. So if there was anything that you kind of were interested in and I whizzed past too quickly, have a look at those docs URLs, have a look at those other things that I've linked to, look at the Java docs and so on, and hopefully you've learned something new.
Cool. Well, I think we're running a little bit long, so just catch Nick. You'll be around for the rest of the time. So catch Nick in the hallway and ask questions. But thanks again, Nick. That was a really good talk.